right, we are back with another episode of the RepVue podcast. We've got Petra Sommerville from Datadog. She's VP of Global Sales Development. Thanks for joining us, Petra.
Thanks, Darren. Thank you, Ryan, for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Appreciate you coming on. Excited to chat and talk about your path and what somebody would be getting into working at Datadog and just kind of the path of getting there. So would love to start just a little bit about your background and why you got into sales and what keeps you in sales, because that's obviously an important question too, because I think all of us have had our moments in sales that have been career defining, I guess. But yeah, would love to hear a little more about you and why you got into it.
Yeah, so I had a less traditional path to sales, so some people might be able to relate a bit more. First of all, just like a little about me and where I grew up. I grew up in New Hampshire, in a very rural, small town. There were about 1,400 people that lived in my town. There was one stoplight, but technically it was blinking. So the whole town has a controversy of like, is there actually a stoplight in the town? There might not
What
be.
color is it blinking? Is it blinking?
It's yellow. So like it's not really a stoplight.
It's a yield light.
It's really a yield light.
Right.
So
it was red.
Really small area. My mother was an attorney. My father was a mechanic. There was just no sales in my family, in my background. I went to University of New Hampshire. I studied marketing there. So again, just like nothing really sales in my orbit. Back then, they didn't have sales curriculums at most colleges. They didn't even really have sales clubs then. So I ended up getting all the way to, I think, like age 24 before sales was at all on my radar. I started my career at a publishing company right out of school. I got the itch about a year and a half into that role. I was like, I really think I want to do marketing. I studied it. I think there could be a great career there. I took a leap. I joined a really small marketing agency. That was my second job out of school. I was laid off 2 weeks later. So I joined the weirdest 2 weeks ever, by the way. Like I wasn't working on anything. There were a lot of meetings happening. And then finally they said, hey, we're restructuring. Sorry, good luck. But that really put me on a journey to what do I really want to do and what kind of company do I want to work for? I decided I want to go a little bigger than like a 30-person marketing agency. And I had started to learn a lot more about software. And what I recognized from my first job out of school, I got to work a little bit with the sales team in that role at the publishing company. And then what I learned from working at the marketing agency was I love the energy of sales, like salespeople and the pace of the work that they're doing is just like magnetic to me. What I learned at the marketing agency is I like marketers, but I don't want to be one. I think they're like what they do is so interesting. So the sales thing was kind of percolating. The marketing thing was in the back of my mind. And then I had an opportunity to kind of like start fresh and figure it out. So I did a lot of research on software companies in Boston. If you do one Google search, even back in 2014, and you put like Boston tech companies marketing, like HubSpot is the answer. So I immediately knew researching HubSpot that I wanted to join. Got really lucky in the interview process. Like looking back, I probably didn't follow any of the advice that I would have for myself now. But I was hired by a few people on the team. Melissa was the woman that hired me then. And I was an SDR there. That was my first like real taste of sales. It was inbound at the time. And I had the opportunity in that role to hire and train my peers. Basically, we were reporting, it was small back then. I think it was number like 800 employee. We were a few months before IPO. So we were like scrappy and figuring things out. So I got to do a lot in that role. I promoted into a team lead role and then had this opportunity to interview for a manager role then. So really early into, it was like a year and a half even being at HubSpot, the opportunity to actually lead my own team came up. And this is an interesting question that I get a lot. So we might unpack this more, but when do you make the decision to go into leadership versus when do you build your IC toolkit to be like as deep as possible? And so I had that fork really early. And probably a theme that you'll see as we talk about my career is I just say yes to everything. Like if it's an opportunity, I'll figure it out and I'll say yes. So I really didn't think about the sales toolkit that I might want to build. Eventually, I just thought, yes, they're offering me an opportunity to lead and take on more responsibility. I want it, I'll take it. So I made that decision. I give this advice to anybody that will ask for it. Like, if I'm an SDR, do I try to sort of muscle through into an SDR manager position, or do I go become a seller, do full cycle? My advice is always to go do full cycle. It is the chip on my shoulder. Every single job that I interview for the rest of my career will be, you've never done a full cycle sales role. How do you coach other SDRs to move into those roles themselves? How do you help leaders understand, even within sales development, how your sales operation should be working? So I've had to do a lot of like self-development around sales and become really close to my sales stakeholders. It can be done. It totally can be done. But I would say to anybody listening, like, if you can go get a really deep knowledge in the discipline that you want to work in or alongside of, go do that. And a sales skill set is invaluable. It gives you so many opportunities for the future. But I went to that manager role and I never looked back. So that role led to another opportunity through my network over at Envision. I was at Envision for a few years, leading part of their North America sales team. They were fully remote. They're a fully remote company. So long before the pandemic, I had the pleasure of learning how to operate all virtually with a team across the US. And eventually actually had the opportunity there to take on their international sales development team. Very interesting motion at Envision because they had a free product. So the sales development role was so much more, just similar to HubSpot, but before they had their free CRM, a lot more about qualifying out in sales development and getting to like the really great fit accounts and clients that our sales team would be able to work well. So learned a lot about that. Moving over to Datadog was the most outbound, and I think like the most, well, I'm biased, but I think the most exciting place to be in sales development is when you get to do a ton of like autonomous, really self-driven outbound activity where maybe you get a list of accounts, but you got to go figure out, who am I talking to at these accounts? What's going to be a great fit for the company? Like, those are super rewarding wins when you and your AE bring those in as warm conversations and turn them into closed won deals. So so that's like the shift from marketing personas at HubSpot into design personas over at Envision, both pretty inbound fueled sales development teams, and then total like 90-degree shift into selling into IT personas at Datadog, and having a really badass outbound motion that the sales development team and sales team does there.
It's a lot to unpack. I love it.
Good.
I have a few notes and questions. Let me start with and Darren, unless you have something pressing.
No, go ahead.
One thing that caught my attention is that you kind of, I'm gonna use my words, but I'll put it in a different way. It sounds like, looking back, you didn't maybe nail the first interview when you were going into that sales role, right? You didn't follow any of the advice that you gave.
Oh yeah, no way.
Right.
No.
Right. But somebody saw something right in you, and I think that's relevant to like maybe also how you think about the folks that you bring on board now. And I'm assuming you still participate in a fair number of interviews on a regular basis. And so maybe talk a little bit about like, what did you miss? Now looking back, you're probably like, oh my God. And then like, how would you coach someone like through that process now? And maybe start a little bit with like, at Datadog, how early career are you hiring? Like, is this like, can you hire first out of school or first sales job, or, how do you think about that? And then
I'll just lead with that because it'll probably tie back to a lot of what I share. But at Datadog, we're hiring we'll hire right out of school. So we've got folks that'll be joining us in June, July, and August this summer, that'll come right out of university or college. And then we're also hiring folks that are early career, maybe within their first 5 years. We love bringing on people that are switching industries. We've had some folks come from recruiting roles and moving into sales. We've had people come from even less traditional backgrounds. So we'll hire from all over. And part of why I love sales development, and why I've stuck with it for so long, is it is such a great opportunity to hire people based on potential, and not necessarily based on all the experience that they have. So going back to that early HubSpot interview that I got so lucky I lucked into, if I had to look back, the thing that I did at the time that I think a lot of us do early in our career is I focused on the role that I was interviewing for, and I tried to align all my interests and my skills to that role. But what I really didn't get at the time was how important understanding the company and what the company cared about, and even more important than that, what HubSpot cared about solving for their customers, and how I would be a part of solving that for their customers in my role. Every single role at a company should be able to tie back to, what are you doing to help solve the problem for the customer that your company aims to solve? I didn't think that way at all at the time. I thought, okay, I've got these communication skills, so when I pick up the phone, I can, figure out how to say the right thing. But I didn't really understand how to tie back to that. So figuring out what your company cares about. What I did an okay job of was recognizing at the time that I liked marketing as a persona. I wanted to talk to marketers. This was well before they had a CRM, so I probably would have loved talking to salespeople too, but I really like talking to marketers. So one of the things that I'm looking for when anybody interviews at Datadog is, have you researched the personas that we sell into in IT and DevOps? And well, first of all, do you want to talk to them all day? You're going to be calling them and emailing them all day long. Are these subject and the things that they care about, things that you want to be curious and interested in, or could gain some interest in that? And then if yes, you do want to talk to those folks and help them solve those problems, how are you going to be uniquely qualified to be able to do that? What is it in your skill set or your background or just your innate curiosity that's going to make you a great fit to get on the phone with someone that's leaving DevOps for a small startup and find ways to connect to what they care about? So I think it did a little of that at the time, but I'm really looking for that for folks that are early in their career. I also just think it helps you land at the right company. Like, you're going to spend so much of your time. You spend so much of your time with the culture internally. It's true. The people you work with really shape your job experience, but the people that you're on the phone with day in and day out shape that as much too. So really get to know your prospects and what they care about. What I'm looking for most that anybody can have, whether they're graduating college or they're 10 years into a leadership career and I'm interviewing them for a second line leadership job, a positive outlook and initiative are two things I know at the time that I had, because I had just come off of being laid off for the first time in my career. And I was absolutely hell-bent on landing in a great role. And even though I didn't really believe in myself at the time, I had to figure out pretty quickly how to believe in myself enough during these interview processes to make other people be just as confident in me. So like just being super positive about what happened to me and what opportunity that afforded. Now looking back, that layoff launched me into such an incredible opportunity. Now I owe a lot of my success to those early days at HubSpot and getting that second chance to kind of restart. So having a positive outlook when things, they happen that you don't expect. And then just taking initiative. Like, what's incredible about like the internet and all the resources that we have now, especially as a young person in a sales career, this podcast alone, if you listen to a few hours of this podcast as you're preparing for interviews at a company, if you go on blogs, you can read so much about the work that you're getting into. But I do think doing that level of research beforehand can be so important, and taking your own initiative to do that. So what I'm looking for are people that just, they have a figure it out mentality. If you give them a problem, well, first of all, they won't back down from it. And they'll go out and they'll figure out like, how do I take one step towards solving this? I mean, sometimes it's as simple as a Google search. Like, I can't tell you how many times in my career my boss said, go figure this thing out. And the first thing I did was like, well, first of all, ask a friend, but also like, how do I do this? Like, just go figure stuff out. You'll learn so much from doing it. And those are the people we all want to work with. People that show up, they think they can tackle stuff, and then they figure out how to go and do it. So I will hire those people on my team that are coming from different backgrounds, different industries, no experience at all, if you can show me in your history where that positive attitude and initiative have played a role.
Yeah, there's a lot there too. I want to go back to the beginning of that because this is something we talk about at RepVue all the time is pick an org where there's great product market fit. And it's the number one thing that reps care about. When they leave a rating, they rank what's the number one thing they care about in their role or just what they're looking for. And you talked about solving for the customer, and it's ironically enough between Datadog and HubSpot, both in the top 8% of product market fit for the products that are being sold there. So like no one should want to work at a company where there's a market that doesn't want what they're selling. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for failure. So that has to be number one.
Yeah, I will say it's hard to figure that out though when you're on the outside, and like me, you're not in software. So at the time, I definitely had gotten better at doing this by the time I was coming to Datadog. So at the time I asked like, hey, can I talk to a couple of customers? And that was one of the best things that I did. I got a couple of names of people that the person interviewing me at the time said, yeah, we just closed these folks, probably 6 months back. They're willing to get on a call with you if you'd like to. So like, just find ways to talk to customers or listen to customers. A really easy way to do this is go on Twitter. Just go on Twitter and follow your company. You will see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like well, maybe it's more true for like IT and developers, but we get it all. They will not hold back on what they love and what they don't love right now about the experience. And you will just start to get this pretty cool, well-rounded view of what's happening there. I think when people research a company, they research materials that the company puts out there. So customer stories can be fantastic, but look for things that give you some insights into how that company's customers are feeling about their product as well.
Love that.
Did you do that kind of independently in your Datadog process? Did you Reddit is another good one, by the way, if you haven't.
Oh, Reddit. Yeah. Great call. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's anonymous versus Twitter. You're probably putting your name out there.
Man, Twitter can be pretty
you would be
anonymous
shocked.
too.
That's true. That's true. DevOps user 123 will have at it on Twitter.
Right. And sometimes they say good stuff occasionally too, but I digress. So did you do some of that? Like, what was your process for Datadog? Did you do any back channeling, or it sounds like you looked at stuff on Twitter maybe and some other sites, or like how did you vet?
Yeah, I did. I got to have a customer conversation. That was probably the best. And now it's one customer, but even from talking with one customer, you get a sense of what is there. And it's like looking at the rounded experience. What was their experience with sales was my first question. Like, hey, what was it like being sold to? And then, all right, great. What was it like when you kicked off with your customer success team? How was onboarding for you? Like the whole, not just, hey, I love the product, I geek out about these features, but how have you been like well supported in coming into Datadog? And that was really neat, just interesting conversation. Like they just made it easy and they're available. And it feels like as big as we get, I know that that's a part of our executives team, just underlying mission to everything. And by the way, any conversations I have that are looking at a process that we might change for our customers or for our prospects, the first question is this going to deliver a better experience for our customers or prospects? If we can't answer that really confidently, it's probably not the right direction for us to go in. So I think those things became really clear. Just the availability. Not a lot of companies have a public telephone line anymore. We still have a public telephone line that you can call, and we will pick up the phone and we'll get you talking to, whether it's customer success. If you call it right now, you'll call the sales development team, and they would love it if you book a meeting. But otherwise, they'll get you routed to the right place. But yeah, we still have a telephone line. We still have an email that anybody in the public can email with a question to Datadog, and we will answer that within it's usually around 3 hours it takes to get back. So just in terms of being accessible and being customer focused, looking for ways to decide, even going on the website and seeing how, if you were a customer, would you get in touch with this company? Some really interesting ways to understand if they're both the product market fit, but also how do they take care of their customers once they win them?
Gosh, the hotline or like the telephone number makes me think of, I think it's Butterball Turkeys has like a 1-800 Butterball for people at Thanksgiving that don't want to burn the house down.
That's amazing. It's equivalent. Don't
Yeah.
call us on Thanksgiving if you're going to burn your house down. We won't
Right.
know.
Right. Ryan, anything you wanted to touch on there? Because there was obviously a lot there. I love the figured out mentality. Like, just go Google something that will get you a lot of answers pretty quickly versus asking somebody internally something that you probably could have Googled on your own.
No, I mean, I was following along there. Positive outlook, taking initiative. Do you want to talk to the buyers, right? Are you comfortable with that kind of persona? And then to Darren's point, the figured out mentality. So that's kind of how you've evolved over time. And then presumably inject that into like trying to uncover. It can be hard. People talk about interviews. I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and some of it's like the interview tips and this and that for both hiring people and candidates. And sometimes, like as a hiring manager, you have this concept of X, Y, or Z, which sounds awesome and it makes for a great LinkedIn post. But then how do you like practically extract that in an actual interview, right? So like people are like, oh, grit or curiosity or have a positive attitude. Like, well, they were smiling. Like, I don't like, so, and maybe,
Yeah.
I don't, so like, are there any things that you would say, like, is there a kind of a formulaic approach to your interview to extract that? Like, does your team have like a template or things like that? How can you, I'm not asking for like the full cheat sheet for those interviewing, but I think if you listen to this podcast, you're probably like in the top X percentile of people trying to prepare for the interview. So maybe they deserve a little bit of cheat sheet.
Yeah, we'll give them a little bit. Many companies now do this, but in our interview process, most interviewers that you'll talk to are looking for something a little different. So we're not all going to ask you the same questions for the same stories. So part of it is just being really consistent in your approach. So how you frame things that you've been through, like just be consistent about that will be helpful, because even though we might be asking different questions, we're still looking for those themes. I ask a lot of why questions. I want to know why people make the decisions that they make, and they don't all have to be a sunny story, right? I was laid off in my very early career, and I was upfront about that when I talked to HubSpot. In fact, I led with that because it's what drove me so much to want to land at a great company for those reasons. So why and what happened to you, and being upfront with that can be really insightful to those that you're interviewing with. I'm paying attention to how people frame information. So when you're telling me about a project that didn't work out at school, maybe you're in your final year at college and there's a lot of blaming other people and there's not a whole lot of self-accountability. I'm paying attention to that, because when you get into a job, there are a lot of excuses for why things might go sideways, right? And ultimately, it is still on you to drive them forward. I do totally subscribe to the Jocko Willink extreme ownership like way of working and approaching working with others. And I think looking for the heart of what you can control and what you're doing is so important. So I'm looking for those things in the interview process. I'm going to have you tell me a lot of stories about what you have experienced and what you've done, to be looking for those kind of themes and how you frame them. But positive outlook, I think, that usually shines through when you're asking people about the difficult stuff that they've faced. So I'm going to ask you about times that you've gotten rejected, when it didn't go your way. And it doesn't mean that you always came out the winner, but what did you do about it after? The analogy that I say about this sometimes is like, I don't care what job we have to do together. If tomorrow you said I was working in an ice cream shop with Darren and Ryan, I would say, I want them to be people I want to show up with every day. And that when I'm like, scooping ice cream is really hard if you've never done it. Like when you're scooping your like 30th cone of the hour right after dinner, kids are crying. Like, are you still feeling like you're on a team where people want to be there, support you, and they're also just driven to get it done because there's a job to do? Like, those are the people that I want to work with. So,
you can't put it in the microwave like you do at home.
You could, they're too big. You're not putting that thing in a microwave. Those are like 5-gallon ice cream tubs. But when have they done jobs that maybe just kind of stunk? And what do they do to get through them and keep other people upbeat around them? And I don't know, people that are really mission focused, I have a tendency to work well with.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like, I was at my wife and I went and got smoothies last night at like a local smoothie place or whatever. And there's a couple of high school kids in there working, super positive, super bright. And one of them, I'm watching, the one's making the smoothies and the other one's like scrubbing the grout in between tile, like on the wall. I'm like, dang, this kid's got a really good work ethic. Like doesn't own the store, probably not a manager, probably making minimum wage plus tips. And he's sitting here like fine tooth scrubbing the grout. I'm like, this kid's gonna end up having a pretty good career if that's the work ethic he's got at that age.
Yeah, that's the person I want to be stuck in the smoothie shop with, 100%.
Yep, it's good. So let's dive a little more about like your maybe more at Datadog and like how you get the team maybe ramped or connected. Like you've obviously worked with global teams in the past and you've had that experience pre-COVID. What does that look like now?
Yeah, staying connected, the bigger your org gets and the more global it gets is really challenging. So I'm always, first of all, I think be looking for ways to do that. If you're a leader listening to this, or even an IC, like talk to other people about how they do this on their teams, even at your own company. I get great ideas from my peer leaders all the time of what they're doing. Slack, I have a global SDR Slack channel, and we use it pretty intentionally for end of the month shout out. So every end of the month, I send a Slack message of, it's kind of amazing. It's like 1 billion names of who hit their quota for the month. And then we always post all the promotions. So anytime an SDR promotes, it goes in that global SDR channel. When people hit really meaningful milestones, we celebrate things like their 2-year, 3-year, 4-year anniversaries at Datadog, especially in the leadership team. But just staying really connected. I think information keeps people connected and feeling informed. So I think it's my job across all of these different teams to make sure we've all got the right information to do our job well. So communicating early and often. I get to every office every quarter. I get to Asia more like once a year. But sitting down when I'm there, my whole purpose of being in those regions is to connect with people. We do lots of, I'll do lots of ask me anythings. We'll present on what I'm doing to give back to the business and give back to the team. I meet monthly with all of the sales development managers globally. There are about 30 on the team today. So once a month I sit down and I hear what they're working through, what's challenging them, what's going well. So I find lots of ways to stay connected to people. And then I sit down once a month with all of the team leads. We have 17 team leads across the globe on different teams in different regions. And so I do that. And then I think the other part, like I get feedback at least twice a year. We send out an employee engagement survey. So that actually is in progress right now. So I comb through every comment, every suggestion, and I get a ton of really great feedback from the team that way. That helps me stay connected. But even more important than getting all of that feedback is then communicating back to the team. What are we doing with this? Now that you've told us what's happening, we make sure that we close the loop on what we're going to action and do there. So those things help me stay connected very globally to the whole team. And then the other part of my job that I think is important for me to do in my position of seeing the global teams and where people are is whenever I can find a connection from one team to another that wouldn't naturally overlap, I make that. So oftentimes, most recently there's an SDR manager in Japan who's doing a phenomenal job and looking for some deeper qualification for her team. They're working on some really neat skills. Well, I've got a manager in the Boston office who's doing some really similar work. So connecting them and having them meet up, they now meet up monthly to compare notes on how they're doing and what they're doing there. So I'm doing that regularly. I pull some of our European managers into US meetings to share what they're doing there. Like, think of my job as keeping a really active web of those things, sharing from everyone that's doing a job that's similar to you, whether you're an SDR or a leader is so important. So just like creating a web for people. I'll do this between SDRs. If I meet with an SDR who I think would hit it off with someone else, maybe a team lead in another team, I'll make the introduction and say, hey, find some time. Zoom is amazing. Like now that the pandemic did one thing really well for all of us, which is we're all ready now, reticent to jump on a a Zoom call and connect with somebody that we wouldn't have otherwise. So I love that there's an opportunity to do that within the org. And the last thing is let people like give them the autonomy and some budget to do it themselves. Like my managers come up with some pretty amazing like team building activities within their teams. We actually have a budget every quarter. Each team gets a budget to spend on just team building, some fun activity that they can do. It started actually during the pandemic. So we were doing lots of, we had like virtual comedians coming in. We were doing wine tastings. We were just doing like lots of different things that we could figure out how to do virtually, but it's continued now that we're back in person. So people are going to Bruins games. They're going out to eat together. They're going axe throwing. Like there's just leave it up to your teams also to figure out like what does connected mean to them. It means a little something to every team. So give them enough freedom to figure that out too.
Virtual axe throwing is probably not a good idea.
Not virtual, yeah, not an at-home setup, yeah.
Yeah, I do like the fact that like you talk about the active web and the connections. That to me is what good leadership is all about, because it's connecting the dots between what's going on in Japan and what's going on in the US and being like, hey, both of you are working on this, you should put both your heads together and come up with a better outcome. Love that you're doing that.
Yeah, and like 75% of what we do is the same. Just
right.
25 that gets a little different between continents and cultures, but 75 is like the heart of what we're doing is the same. So, and I think that's true for if you're at a good company that's got a good mission, you should feel that way about most teams in the like at least 50% of what you're doing probably overlaps with another team that you could learn from and benefit from. If you're on the sales development team and thinking, why would I ever talk to customer success? We don't, I'm at the tip of the spear and there once we've closed. Open your mind to learning from what they've got to share, because you're all on the same mission. And I think, figuring out those connections. We're doing we've just now started doing some cool internal. So I'll be doing a career conversation with our CS org, and then our CS leader will come in and do a career conversation with the sales development org, talking about, where we've been, how we thought about different moves in our careers. But I think that stuff internally too just does a lot to keep people connected. Datadog launched last year. I got to be a part of a pilot program for a formal mentorship where you would be matched with a mentee from across the company, not in your organization, but sort of somewhere adjacent. And so I had the opportunity to mentor a woman who is an enterprise customer success manager. Not only was that relationship really beneficial for me to feel like I can share as a mentor, I learned a lot from her too about customer success at Datadog and what her career could look like. We've now recently this year actually made that accessible to the whole company. I think it's for folks that have been at Datadog for at least 1 year is the requirement, but you can sign up to be a mentee and to be a mentor. And so those kind of things are also beyond just my own team, like just phenomenal ways to stay connected and learn from folks. Especially those that are either in a gender or otherwise minority, just phenomenal opportunity that way.
Is that Slack channel, like the global, like sales development Slack channel, are individual contributors encouraged to post wins in there?
We have some separate, it's funny, like I'm always like, what do we do in which channel? I think all leaders feel this way, like how do we, so we have a couple channels where they post wins and those are regional.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and this is a good thing, otherwise it would literally be like, it would move so fast that you almost couldn't keep up, because we post every meeting that we book and every op that we win, so, or every op that we develop. So it'd be a little bit of an extra ticker, but we have a channel for commercial North America and enterprise North America, and then same in EMEA and in APAC.
Yeah. And like does Datadog in general kind of get into like how deals were done? Like if sales closes a big logo, like do they get into like, here's who I worked with internally and here's what we had to do to get the deal done? Like do you do any of that for like how the meeting was won? Like how meetings got set?
When they post, who did they get in touch with? How did they get in touch with them? Why are they taking the call? And why? And they'll usually we'll have the SDR add a blurb of like, how confident are you that this is an opportunity? Like, what's your confidence level here? What's really cool, we for all of our, and most, I think a lot of sales orgs have this set up automatically too, but when we do win a deal, the information that you get in the email for those closed won deals from sales are just a treasure trove of information. So this is another place that I tell SDRs, if you're at a great company and you want to be an AE at that company, go to your closed won file for email and just start reading through the deal review. I mean, they talk about how they won the deal, and what's always remarkable is it is a team effort every time. It is never one rep alone. You'll see who they're thanking, who they're calling out, their SE. Obviously, their leadership team is usually involved, and then lots of peers on their team. Sometimes people from the support team that have played a role if there was a trial going on. So just starting to understand, how do you build a really well-rounded deal? Those emails can put you onto a really good start.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add, like you talked about SDRs being the tip of the spear in customer success. Customer success has so many stories on why, like how a deal was done and why a deal renewed are sometimes very different use cases. And you can learn a lot if you're at the tip of the spear as an SDR of why somebody renewed, and use that if you're trying to, if an oil company renews for XYZ reasons that you hadn't thought about why an oil company had signed, you can leverage those customer stories when you're doing outbound. It's huge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more. And same with sales engineering. Like sales engineering and customer success are teams that sales development doesn't get a peek into as often. We're really fortunate here. We have a sales engineer who volunteers once a week to spend time. It's sort of like an office hours setting, but SDRs join with questions, and they tell stories of deals that they've been on. So we figured out some great ways internally to do that. So we try to serve up for the SDR team lots of those different connections. But making those connections on your own also help you go so far as an individual.
Have you noticed, to that point, have you noticed a trend between who sits in those meetings weekly with the SE? Because to me, like in my past experience, the people that are in those meetings that go and learn are the ones that are tending to get promoted, because their information's, like the information they're putting into their head is accelerating at a much faster pace than people that aren't doing that.
Absolutely. And it's not just participating, it's the people that show up with questions, almost so many questions that you're like, okay, let somebody else jump in. But it just means that they're figuring out, like they're figuring out how to get a little dangerous, but they want to know more. Curiosity, like I didn't touch on this in what I look for in people that I want to bring onto the team. But it's probably as important as what I shared in your positive outlook and initiative. Having curiosity to go the extra mile to learn and develop. Like if you know a little bit, I want to know people that are going to want to know more and more and more. And so those are the people usually in those SE office hours that we have to like cut off and be like, all right, we got to talk about something else. But those are the folks that when they like it, yes, they're the ones being promoted, but they're also the ones that are being promoted they're probably winning deals that get a little more technical than the rest of us are necessarily excited about trying to push through and figuring out who can I talk to on the side in sales engineering or get on the call. But I think part of sales is just being unbelievably resourceful to figure out answers quickly for people and say them in a way that they can understand and feel compelled. So I think if you are resourceful and curious, like it totally comes back. Take advantage of the office hours that are happening. The optional training sessions should never feel optional when you're in a sales development role, any role really. But definitely the earlier on you are in your career. So if it says optional, just ignore that. Always go.
Yeah. Brian, you kind of like reps that are curious, right?
Curiosity.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah. Always have. I mean, it's always been number one on my list, really. There's a couple other things that are high on the list, but yeah, curiosity is always, and the way that I think about it is, well, first of all, obviously, like you're going to be curious about the prospect. If you're curious in the interview, right, I want you to learn about the prospect's business so you can hopefully uncover pains, uncover problems, uncover, potential areas where you can add value, right? So, and for me, like knowing, Datadog can, if it tends towards the technical type of sale, right? What the way I would think about it, and I'd be curious to your reaction to this, is like, I'm totally fine if they're completely clueless, but if they start with like a very, very basic question about the product or solution, and then what I look for is not that, but then when they get the answer, how do they follow up with more questions? Can they go, like at Datadog, there's like 12 levels, right? Can they ask question level 1, and then you give them the answer level 1, and then do they get to level 2, and then can they get to level 3, and all with the express, intention of educating themselves, right? And just knowing and just being curious. Like, do they read anything? What do they do? What are their interesting hobbies that just because they're interested in certain things. So I love curious, for particularly for earlier career salespeople, like they'll just quickly learn about their prospect and ask questions. And of course, we all know like discovery and all that, it's listening and all that sort of thing. So yeah.
I also think, don't we all love sitting down with someone that's curious, that wants to know about us so that we can talk about ourselves? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, a prospect, we're all human. Your prospects are people. So if you sit down and you genuinely, they get the sense that you really want to know about them and what's going on, yeah, they'll warm up. They'll want to share.
Yeah,
This
you
is
have those friends in your personal life where you go to meet with them and it's just them spewing for an hour and a half, and
Yeah, you're like, oh, okay,
that's
well,
kind of exhausting.
Where's my in? Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to touch on too about the curiosity, one of the pieces of advice that anybody gets that's interviewing nowadays is come with questions, right? You're sitting in your interview, come with questions. Now, yes, come with questions, but come with questions that you genuinely want to know the answer for, and have another question. If I give you an answer, especially if it's meaty, right? If it's a yes, no, sure, move on. If I give you like some meaty information, I'm looking for what question do you ask me next, instead of okay, and the next question. So if you're interviewing, don't go online and find the list of questions that Google tells you should use in an interview. Think about, what do you really want to know, that either helps you make a decision about the company, or helps you, even better, you've already decided you want to work for that company, would help you ramp when you get there. So I always think, like, start working on how you're going to be great at the job, even starting in the interview process. All that information should go into how would you hit the ground running on day one.
Yeah. Now, let me add one other tip for those listening is, understand who you're meeting with and have questions specific for that person, right? Don't ask Petra a question that the hiring HR, entry recruiter can answer about, how many days PTO you get, right?
benefits. Yeah.
And don't ask you about, something, maybe the first line, maybe focus your questions on more career development or company bigger picture stuff. And then when you're interviewing with your manager or something like that, maybe you get into more of the product Q&A stuff. And so really, understand, this, and this can be tough for earlier career people, but understand who you're speaking with and maybe what they're looking to get out of the interview, and cater your line of questioning to that end as well, is something that people don't think about as much.
Yeah. And that's tough when you're early in your career. Like, if you're maybe coming out of college and haven't been in a major professional setting, I mean, that's tough to be able to put yourself in that mindset. And maybe you get nervous when you're going to meet with the SDR manager or whoever it is, and even up to your level too, Petra. Like, maybe are you like one of the final people that somebody might interview with?
So I'm no longer in the interview process. Our second line leaders are the final interview, but I'm on all of our interviews for any sales development leadership role. So managers, directors, anybody above that line. I do think it's worth calling out. One of the things that has impressed me about Datadog when I was interviewing, and I think what you should look for, if you're early career, your recruiter should help you navigate this. And they do. Here, our recruiters, part of what they do when we're moving somebody into the interview process is say, this is who you're meeting with, and this is what you might want to focus your conversation on. So I think we've got to give people a step in the right direction. It's their first, I've been there, we've all been there the first time. So I think, like, look for a recruiting team that wants to see you be successful. They're not going to give you the answers to the test, but they'll help point you in a direction. And then I think lastly, be flexible. If you're interviewing and if you ask me, if I'm interviewing an SDR and they did ask me about benefits, I would say, hey, that's a great question for the recruiter. Maybe we could focus on some of the things that you might be curious about the company, and be ready to pivot. Have a question ready that might not be about benefits or recruiting. I'll always be kind. I'm not going to, shut somebody down, but be prepared for where you want to go that might be different. So just be really flexible in the interview and the questions that you have prepared. Don't be scripted. Have some things that you have, some stories you want to tell, but be ready to kind of move on your feet. it'll be the same in sales. You'll be doing it all day on the phone. So why not prepare for it in the interview process too?
Agreed. Let's finish up with a time in your career at Datadog that you're proud of and why.
Yeah. So the time, it's probably multiple times, but I've had the opportunity to promote now 3 of our frontline managers into director roles here. I think any leap in leadership is really monumental to your development. So when you move from an IC to a manager role for the first time, and from a manager to a second line, there's so much that happens in that next chapter of whatever you're doing. So I take a ton of pride in the people that I've gotten to promote, and now just get to work with them in even more different capacity. We've promoted this year alone a handful of managers to the senior manager role. Every year we promote right between like 80 and 100 SDRs to the AE role. So the internal mobility, it's pretty phenomenal. I pulled this stat actually a few months ago, and then I looked it up this week so that I had it right. But today on our sales team in North America, so across Boston and Denver, there are just over almost 30 sales managers. 19 of those sales managers started at Datadog as SDRs.
Wow.
So like the pride of getting to hire somebody or work with them closely, bring them to the next steps of their career is just, it is the best. Those are the best days of my job when I get to say, congrats, you earned it. So I keep looking for those opportunities. I've got a phenomenal leadership team now. There are 7 directors and myself that are sort of make up the senior leadership team for sales development. So they've all got bright futures. I'm excited for more of those days where I get to give good news.
The grittiness of Boston tech just keeps coming out on our podcasts between HubSpot and Link Squares and you guys. I mean, it's unbelievable some of the stories we've heard.
Mm-hmm. According to RepVue data, Datadog is in the 93rd percentile of professional development and training amongst software orgs, which is a pretty competitive bucket. So
is that right?
It's the information is certainly backed up. That's incredible. The promotions, I mean, the 19, I think, of 30 that you mentioned. Love to hear it, and congratulations on your recent promotion as well, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
On LinkedIn.
So
yeah, awesome.
It is a team effort. It is
Yep.
I'm, a lot of people do the work that I get to support. So I'm very lucky to lead this org.
Thanks for coming on, Petra. Appreciate you
spending
the time with
nice
us.
to meet you both.
Yeah, likewise.
Again.